I love this song, this idea of all that is you. Where do we find our lives as we look back over our lives and find that thread that really connects our hearts to where our lives have been? Or can we? That may be the challenge. Maybe we can't really. Maybe we've been spending so much time listening to the other narratives. And as I said earlier, it's difficult to shake those narratives, to shake those stories that we grow up with, that we hear constantly in the media, that we hear constantly in the political debate. It's hard to shake those narratives and to resonate with where our heart is. And yet that's where I think we sometimes, where I would just say often, we have the best chance of connecting to God in the midst of things, to connect to what is holy and sacred. This idea that the heart knows often what the eyes cannot see. When I look back at this band, and I think that, about 2 years ago, I guess almost 2 years ago this Sunday, when I took over in here and Charles Gaby resigned, and after 10 years of his being, or 12 years of his being in here, and most of those years I had been the band director at that time, and now Brad's been doing the band direction, and of course it is the rest of the band has been sighing a great sigh of relief ever since, mainly because I don't know what I'm doing, and Brad does. And that makes a huge difference to working with talented musicians. I'll never forget, way back when I first started playing with this band and directing this band early on, and Aidan Bubeck, who now plays with Miranda Lambert, was our bassist. You'll remember that now. And a number of you guys were here back then, too. And I don't remember what song we did, but I started off the song in completely the wrong key, and the band just joins right in the wrong key, and plays along. And then afterward, Aidan leaned over after the song was over, and he says, "You realize that was the wrong key." And I thought, that's amazing. This band can go anywhere. They just follow it anywhere. But see, now they don't have to worry about that. Now they actually know where they're going because the leader knows where they're going. But the only reason why I bring that up is because that's the thing I never would have imagined. Maybe as a kid I wanted to be a band director. I wanted to have a band. I wanted to be a rock star. And even to this day, I look to Brad and I just keep thinking, I wish I were him sometimes. I just love that comfort and that rock and who wouldn't want to be, right? Brad's yeah. Yeah. He's blushing. We got to blush. All right. But the reason I bring it up is because that's not where I would have seen myself, even though that's where I'd hoped to. And the reason why I'd hoped to is many of you know my story growing up, that I grew up with opera in my background. And so my grandmother insisted that I become a classical musician. She saw the music in my family, and that was the narrative that she was continuing to push for me, is this idea of being a classical musician. It was certainly in my family and other places. And so as she had given up an opera career in New York, she sang with the New York Opera as a young woman and as a featured coloratura soprano. And then she came to Fort Worth, and then she and two other ladies started the Fort Worth Opera. And that's why we have the association now. You can still find her name there on the registry, Eloise McDonald Snyder. And she sang some with the opera. But the downside of having a grandmother who founded the opera is, of course, that when your buddies are putting into practice their scientific understanding at the local movie theater for the matinee on Saturday, and they're trying to see just how far a flexible popsicle stick will flip a milk dud to the ceiling in the balcony area and testing that theory, while they're doing that, I am having to be at an opera and seeing how long I can stay awake. So my grandmother, when there was an opera, that's what we did on Saturday for the matinee. We went to the opera. And we were dressed in our suits with our ties and whatnot. And it was pretty tedious because the opera, of course, back in those days, was in foreign. The language was always foreign, but there were no subtitles, so you never knew what was going on. And acting wasn't exactly what opera was about. So movements and drama was kind of unremarkable, while the voices might be beautiful, but you had no idea what was being sung. So on occasion, I would go with my buddies, with my friends, because we'd take it was like a community activity. And so the Cub Scouts, the 5 or 6 of us from the local Cub Scout troop, we would go on a Saturday. And I remember one particular Saturday we went there, and we were watching La Traviata. And I don't know if you remember La Traviata, but it's kind of a Romeo and Juliet sort of story, you know, the classic faux pas of understanding and misunderstanding. And Julieta, who was, Violetta, who was basically a woman of the night, had fallen in love, but her boyfriend had found out about it, and then there was all this community pressure and shaming, and he left her and had gone off when, in fact, she had longed to try to change her life, et cetera, et cetera. So he thinks that she has died of consumption, whereas she thinks he's left her. And then, of course, he comes returning to try to reconcile things. So after being here for some extended period of time at that particular opera, my buddies and I were sitting there trying to think of something to do. I mean, if you put 5 prepubescent men in uniform together, you know, something's going to happen, in spite of the authoritarian hands that might be off to the sides, you know, the ushers and stuff. Something's bound to happen. So while all this is going on, in the dark, one of us looked over and spotted an adventure. There are 5 girls 2 rows ahead of us. Campfire girls. In uniform. And so the whole rest of the opera was trying to figure out how to make contact with those girls. And of course, it was challenging because an opera can be a very dramatic and intense kind of setting. So we had to wait for right opportunities. When there was a lot of noise, when the symphony was building, when those things would happen, we would try to get their attention, but we had a row between us. When one of our guys finally came up with this perfect idea. You remember making those paper footballs that you could make? And then they would have an opening on one side so you could slip notes into the paper football. So we made a large paper football out of the program. We tear off the sheet, and we made several of them, and then we put a note in there. It's very clandestine sort of secret code. It said, "Hi." And then we just waited to see what would come back, right? You know, it was like fishing, you know. So at the right dramatic moment, you know, we sent them forward. You know, we slid it underneath there, and nobody noticed. And then we could tell one of the girls caught it back. She kind of looked back, and then we saw these other girls kind of going like, you know, making signs like "don't pay attention" or that kind of thing. But we just waited with bated breath. And then by the time we got to the end, that place where Violetta's laying out on the chaste lounge, and she's singing her final aria, her tragic aria, because once again, the miscommunication, and her lover was never going to get back in time, and she was going to die as she sang that final aria. The tension in that room was palpable. The eyes were filling with tears, and we just waited because we thought we were going to lose it. This was the end of the opera, and nothing had come back. But at just the right moment, as she finished that beautiful, magnificent aria, and the crowd stood in rapture applause, that's when suddenly we noticed 2 footballs coming back. And they had 2 other notes back with them, 3 pieces of juicy fruit gum, and a phone number. And I'll never forget what my friend Mike Chambers looked over to me and looked up at me, and he said, "I love the opera." You know, drama's where it happens, right? But that wasn't where I was, and so I had my uncle who was also trying to influence me with his musical influences because he was a bluegrass musician, and he grew up with bluegrass music. In spite of his mother being an opera singer, he hung out with guys. He was involved in ranching and stuff, so he would invite me over to listen to the bluegrass music. And you know, bluegrass music is kind of interesting. My mother used to get mad at me for listening to rock music, and she would force me to go over and hang out with Uncle Mac as he would play his bluegrass music, because she said bluegrass music was good and rock music was bad. You remember this song? In-a-gata-da-vida, honey. Don't you know that I love you, darling? So you remember that song by Iron Butterfly? In-a-gata-da-vida. Don't you know that I love you? My mom would hear that, and she'd say, "That is just bad music." And I'd say, "It's a Bible story." I mean, I found out, my friend Ricky was telling me it's in the Garden of Eden. It's a rock interpretation of Scripture. And my mom said, no, it's not. She just didn't like rock music. And she thought bluegrass was American music. There's either opera, which is classical, or there's bluegrass, which is Americana. And so she'd sit down and she'd make us go sit down with Uncle Mac. Y'all remember this one, this old bluegrass tune. This is one he loved to sing. Once two strangers climbed old Rocky Top, looking for a moonshine still. The strangers ain't come down old Rocky Top, reckon they never. You can sing the chorus with me. Rocky Top, you'll always be home sweet home to me. You know why it's home sweet home? Because they're building a moonshine still at the top of the mountain. I mean, what do you think they're doing? They're going up there getting drunk. That's why they don't come back down. And my mom would just smile and go like, yeah, it's good music. It's good music. Yeah, I mean, she never really listened. And so I lived with these kind of confusing messages most of my life, which is right about the time Steppenwolf came to America. And when I heard that band on the TV and saw them and having that fun and the screaming and the smoke machines and stuff, and I heard that song, I knew what I needed to do. I wanted to be in music because that's where all my family was pushing me. This would be my musical path. So I went to my uncle. I was in 5th grade, and I asked him for an electric guitar for Christmas, a Fender Stratocaster electric guitar for Christmas. And he said, why would I go to that kind of expense? And I said, because I was born to be wild. And he said, that's not music. He said, music is discipline and passion and more discipline. You got to stay with it. And I said, no, I didn't. I said, I am passionate. He said, no. And he and I were not connecting at all. And no matter how many times I plead, it wasn't going to happen. And I remember hanging out with my friends at this place that my mom she laughed about this place. On Clover Lane, if you look at Clover Lane now, just south of the freeway, it's now kind of a wall because they've expanded the freeway. It used to be a strip of shops there years ago at Clover Lane on the south side of the freeway. And there was a place called the Capri Theater. And then there was a couple of shops, a clothing shop, and then there was a drugstore at the corner right there. And in the back of the drugstore, there were pinball machines and Mad Magazine and stuff, and my mom called that the Den of Iniquity. And that's where we would hang out after school because, we had some time. So we'd hang out there, play pinball, and read the magazines and have sodas or whatever else. And there was this one magazine that caught my attention because when you're in a desperate state, maybe that's when your eyes are kind of ready for anything, for answers, because I was in a sort of a desperate state. And I saw this magazine called Amazingly True Stories. And inside there was this story about a guy who had used the power of visualization to heal his severed finger. He was in a lumberyard-related accident, and he lost his little finger, and apparently through the power of visualization, he was able to grow that finger back. He was able to will that finger back. Now, keep in mind, this was the same magazine that would often have a guy like in a suit with an alien head, and it would go, this is really your neighbor, you just didn't know it. And then called Amazingly True Stories. But I'm a 5th grader, right? And so I thought, well, it says true, and I took the magazine home, and I practiced visualization, and I visualized a Fender Stratocaster for Christmas. Of course, it didn't materialize. When Christmas came around, I ran down underneath the tree, there were our presents, and Uncle Mac always had the big presents, so we were always anxious to get his present. My parents were divorced, I might not have mentioned that, but so he was kind of like the one that always gave us the big present, and mine was only in a little box about 1.5 feet long by maybe 1/2 foot wide, and wrapped in a grocery bag, like he always wrapped his presents, with a marker on it with your name on there, and when I went after opening it up, I didn't want to lose heart, because I thought, well, maybe it's like a tease, it's a capo and a pick, and then a sign that says, your guitar is in the garage, or look behind the couch, how you get all excited. And so I had that kind of optimism about like the kid who was promised a pony and got a box of horse manure, and he's going, there's a pony in here somewhere, I know that. And I was ripping the paper off and stuff, and when I got to the bottom of the box, this is what I ended up with. Now, I kid you not, it's not this one, of course, but it was one just like this. It was a ukulele. Now, imagine what you know about a ukulele now, but back then, in the late 60s, the only thing I knew was this guy that had first made an appearance on The Tonight Show, who was about 6'3", named Tiny Tim, who sang these unremarkable and somewhat embarrassing tiptoe through the tulips, I mean, I thought, why would you give me this? And my uncle tried to make a joke out of it. He said, oh, it was originally a guitar. I left it next to the dryer. And you know, then he tried to tried to persuade me and kind of dissuade, now I can't think of the word I'm looking for, assuage my anxiety by saying, I will teach you how to play it, and if you show me you're passionate, then maybe you get the guitar later. But you got to show me you got discipline and passion. Well, he taught me how to play Born to Be Wild on the ukulele. It was at least a hopeful step. I took the ukulele to show and tell, because that's what we did in Miss Brankston's class after Christmas break. We did show and tell. Now, keep in mind here, you know, I'm a fifth grader, and I'm impressionable and hopeful, probably beyond reason. My mom dresses me for the occasion. I'm wearing a Nehru jacket. You remember those double-breasted, wide lapel? I'm wearing bell-bottom pants. I've got Beatle boots on. My hair's kind of spiked up. I mean, in retrospect, I looked ridiculous. But I looked perfect for this, apparently, except for one small thing. The rock star does not have a guitar. He has a ukulele. So that when I jumped in front of the class at the end of class and started playing, get your motor running, head out on the highway, looking for adventure. And I couldn't even get to the chorus because the class had just fallen apart. And one kid had the audacity to start yelling out, "It's Tiny Tom!" And my teacher, who I had looked to as my ally because she said, "This will be great," was over the desk laughing with her hands on her face and saying, "This is just, you're too cute, you know," and calm down. Well, the class was lost, and I was embarrassed, and I felt totally betrayed, as if my uncle and mom were sitting at home going, "This will be really good." And I lost my temper, and I slammed the uke on the floor and turned to walk away, and it broke into about a dozen pieces, made a huge cracking sound. And because the class suddenly just, they were stunned. They stopped. They didn't say anything. They just were looking at me, their eyes and mouth open. My teacher was like, that was too far. And I was about to sort of apologize when two guys in the back went, "Rock on, man!" And my friend Ricky Phelps came up to me after class. Actually, it was after school because I got in trouble and I went to the principal's office. But after school, he said, "Yeah, you don't remember Pete Townsend, the lead guitarist for The Who. At the end of every concert, smash the guitar, you're a rock star." Well, I didn't play the uke anymore for a long time. In fact, my uncle didn't get me a uke. I got myself a guitar in junior high. And Ricky Phelps was one of the guys that I got with, as well as a guy named John Stubfield. We called him Stubby, and he was the bass player, and we had a drummer, or John was the drummer. And we had a little garage band, and we played Steppenwolf in the garage, and we played The Who and different things like that, Rolling Stones. And occasionally we'd enter the school talent shows. And of course, again, my vision just wasn't lining up with reality. You know, I kept seeing myself as a great singer-songwriter, as a rock star, and we come in third place or fourth place, you know, and just wasn't ever resonating. Where was that passion? I thought I had it. But the reality is that this just wasn't lining up. And I kind of gave it up, to be honest with you. In college, I remember this friend of mine, Walter Halpenny. Maybe you guys know him. Walter Halpenny is a doctor here in Fort Worth. And we were roommates in college. And he encouraged me to pick up the guitar again. Because he used to remind me, he'd say, "You know, you really got talent. You know, you're really pretty good on the guitar. Better than me," he'd say. And he'd say, "You got a decent voice. Why don't you just start playing like that?" I had to kind of get my head away from rock music because it wasn't working. So I started playing Gordon Lightfoot, and I started playing James Taylor. And, of course, John Denver was very popular. And then I ended up playing at Hole in the Wall in Austin, different places like that, and having fun. Again, though, whenever I'd enter the local talent shows in Austin, I always came up in third or fourth place, you know. And so it was just for fun on the side. And it's interesting looking back because you can see where threads run. You can see a thread. But then I start asking myself, what held the thread together? Why did it continue to lead through my life? Some of us can look back in areas of our life and go, "Yeah, I can see how I got to be this place now." But there's also this part of us that I think when our heart really knows what's going on and we listen to our heart, that's when things start to open up faster and more unexpectedly. and we would look back and go, God's hand must have been in it. And in many ways, I think exactly that. Somehow we're resonating, we're connecting with all that's possible. As the song said, all that is you. And we're connecting. But that requires that leap of acceptance of permission. And it came for me when I was here for the first time in 1981. I was actually hired on as a full-time youth minister. I'd been in seminary for a couple of years, and I was hired here, and I brought my guitar, and we did, I sang for the youth and whatever, but then I sing in here in UMW groups and different things and at Sunday school classes, and I was singing in this very room in 1981, and I'm just singing some songs. An elderly woman afterwards, she was probably 85 maybe, maybe I don't know. She was widowed, and her name was Inez Whalen. Long-time member of First Methodist, came up to me afterwards and said, it was beautiful. I said, thank you. It's not exactly the rock star fan I was looking for, but I'm good, thank you. And she said, no, I mean, it was really beautiful. And she kept saying it over and over, and I said, well, thank you. She said, well, you don't understand. My husband was a musician. And I said, that's awesome. She said, he was the band director at Haltom City High School. I said, good, that's neat. And she said, well, he died last year, but one thing I always remember about him, there was always playfulness. There was always love, that same kind of joy that just gave him joy when he would play music. It was like he was a child, and he just loved it. It was that passion. She said, I see the same thing with you up there when you were singing. You just seemed to have fun and really connect to it. And I said, well, thanks so much. That meant a lot. And I started to walk away, and then she said, would you come visit me? So I thought, okay, I will. It's kind of like a pastoral visit, I figured. And I showed up later that week, and after 2.5, 3 hours visiting with her, she stunned me, and she said, I got no relatives, I've got no kids, no immediate nephews and anyone close by. I want you to have my husband's instruments. And she gave me all of his instruments. I was stunned, I was overwhelmed, I was humbled by the generosity of it, but I was also just shocked by the irony of this, and I tried to get out of it, and then eventually she wouldn't let me. I thanked her for this kind of thing. But here's the funny thing. She gave me an electric guitar, which was really nice. It was not a Fender, but I'm not going to complain. It was really nice. It was a banjo, and I thought, well, okay, I don't know what to do with a banjo, but I kept the banjo. She gave me a trumpet. She gave me a couple of different other instruments, but here's what she said afterwards. As I was going to the door, she said, his favorite instrument I almost forgot. It's small, and I almost overlooked it. And she went back to the closet, and then she pulled out, and you know what it was? It was a ukulele. Now, it wasn't this ukulele, because it's a very old Martin ukulele, and it's sitting at home in a case, but she gave me the ukulele, and I'll never forget, she said, one thing I learned about my husband is that if you're open and to being surprised by things, you'll discover new ways of doing things with it. She said he played the ukulele, but he didn't play Hawaiian music, she said. He played jazz with the ukulele. She said, it's such a surprising little instrument. You'll never know what you might find with it. And then I thought, well, I remember what I did with it, and I didn't really think much of a ukulele. Tiny Tim was still in the back of my head. So I left the ukulele in the closet until a friend asked me to go sing with him. A guy named Jim Newton asked me to go sing with him at hospitals, and the ukulele was a nice change of pace, and I brought it, and it stole the show. In fact, the ukulele stole the show everywhere we went because it was so novel and so surprising. But that's the nature, I think, sometimes of life when you're just open to it. The novel and surprising is always there when you're open to it, when you listen for what your heart could feel. And so I listened to the kids. Next thing I know, I'm doing rap songs with it. Home from school, make a peanut butter sandwich, and you try to get your homework done. You turn on the TV just for the company. Well, there's somebody who was having fun. Well, I guess I better look at the chapter in my book. My teacher says the work it's due. Sure look pretty when I'm living on the video, and I wonder and I did that at a 9th grade school in Missouri about 4 years ago with this other performer from another part of the country, and it was a huge auditorium, and I finished the song and the rap and everything, and the crowd, they all stood up and started cheering, and then when it got quiet, one guy stood up and said, dude, I'm going to need therapy now. And, of course, it's true. Again, the unexpected. Rapping with a ukulele, a middle-aged guy. But that's what I've discovered. It's that willingness to be open, to realize that God comes to us in unexpected ways, but we have to be open to it. I remember listening to David White last week Some of you all listen to On Being, and David White, the poet, was saying something very interesting. He said, if you want to know who you are, ask someone else. Joseph Campbell used to say, where are the wise ones? Where's Jesus beside the pool of water? When you've been sitting there waiting all this time. The old parable, the old joke about the guy on the elephant. The guy was praying out in front of him, praying that God would spare his life, and the elephant ran over him, and he goes to heaven and says, God, where were you? And he says, I was on the elephant saying, get out of the way. Who are the wise ones? How do we find ourselves? Where do we find our path? We have to listen. We have to open ourselves up. And after a long time of kind of doing that, the ironies of how things come back around, I think, is kind of funny. And yet I don't think they're ironies at all. I don't think they're that surprising now. Nothing surprises me. Tim and I were at a music festival or ukulele festival in Rhode Island. Come on up here, band. We were at a music festival in Rhode Island a couple of, about 10 years ago. And I told this story about the ukulele to this guy from Germany. And he says, I want to show you something. And he took me over to this merchant who was selling ukuleles, and he picked up this little ukulele here. And he said, this is an electric ukulele, but it's not just anything. It's called the uke stick because it has only a fretboard and a pickup. So all you hear is whatever you plug in. And we had just been watching, Tim and I had just been watching this crazy video of where people are taking ukuleles today with electronics. And it suddenly occurred to me to put two and two together, and I could finally have the Fender Stratocaster. I think creation is always calling us to be something. If you have money, it's always calling us to be something with the money. If you're a painter, I think it's always calling us to be something with our painting skill. If you're a poet, I think it's always calling us to be something. I think creation, if you're a people person, I think God is always inviting us, be something with that. Don't just hold it in. The challenge is to take that leap forward. And when you start listening to your heart, then you start discovering what Mary Oliver said. What was that? What will you do with your one wild life? Maybe we all are truly meant to be born to be wild. Here we go. Get your motor running. Head out on the highway. Looking for adventure, or whatever comes our way. Here we go. Yeah, darling, I'm gonna make it happen. You take the world in a love embrace. Gotta be love. Fire all of your guns at once and explode into space. I like smoking lightning, every bit of thunder, racing with the wind. And this feeling that I'm under. Yeah, darling, I'm gonna make it happen. You take the world in a love embrace. You fire all of your guns at once and explode into space. You know it, sing it with me. And like a true nature child, we're all born to be wild. We're gonna fly so high, we're never gonna die. Born to be wild. Born to be wild. Kevin, take it. Join us. Born to be wild. Born to be wild. Ready?
Tom McDermott, baby.
Oh, wow. That's only the second time I've gotten a standing ovation for that one. Thank you. The first one was ninth graders. All right.